All right. Well, thank you, Jessica, for getting us through all the logistics. I think, are you going to advance the slides or I just was, there we are. Okay, thank you. So welcome everyone to this second session of UWIDA's Emerging Topics series. We're really excited to bring this program and to have our speakers today to join us in our partnership with Walnut Way Conservation Corps, which is a longtime member and partner of UWIDA's. Tonight we're going to go through a few things just related to why we're doing this and to talk a little bit about the organization and community wealth building. But most of what you'll be watching tonight is an informational history lesson, I guess, if you will, about the African American cooperative movement. And we are very excited to have Emonia Barnett with Walnut Way and Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nembhard, remember that stuff, with us today to talk about some of the work that she has done in this space. And so it'll be a dialogue, and we're really excited to have that be a part of tonight's program. And then so the opportunity for you to ask questions and wrap, and also be thinking about, as you're listening to them and what you're learning, if there's anything you'd like to learn about further and what we could do with this kind of work after the fact here in Milwaukee. We, UWIDA and Walnut Way have been talking about that as well. And so what kind of follow-up activities we could be doing to help continue to spread the good word about cooperatives and what they can do for our community and how they are a great way to invest in some of the work that we're doing. So if you want to go to the next slide. UWIDA, if you're not familiar, the Urban Economic Development Association, we are a membership association of people and groups that work in community and economic development. So it's everybody from corporations to banks to neighborhood-based organizations to housing counseling agencies, local government, state government. It's big and broad, but always focused on issues of economic and community development. We have two big programs, Take Root Milwaukee, which focuses on sustainable homeownership activities and promoting resources available for people to buy, fix, and keep their home. And then Bank On Greater Milwaukee, which is a coalition focused on banking access and financial empowerment. If you are interested in learning more about us, you can become a member, you can join our mailing list. You can see all of that at our website, which is, I will add in the process of being updated. This is a series. So we have this Emerging Topics series, which is a way for us to bring new ideas that are around already, work that has been going on in the sector, lift it up, maybe showcase it, and then to also connect it to some of the work that our members and partners are doing. So we've been doing this series for the last couple of years, and for many of you, if you are a UWIDA member, you'll remember a year ago, we did a session on community wealth building. And so what was that? And all the things that are entailed in that approach to things. And so one of the strategies in community wealth building is cooperatives. And so this topic is really directly connected to some of that groundwork that we laid there and some of the work that we think we'd love to see in our city in this space. We have a next session coming up that actually came together very quickly, so you'll be seeing more marketing about that. But number 3, we are going to be working with SewerPAC, the Regional Planning Commission. They actually completed an equity analysis for the long-range land use plan and some recommendations that was released earlier this year as part of their review and update. And so this presentation, for those of you, if you've been to your General Vision 2050 sessions, this is actually a deep dive into that equity analysis. So please join us. It's an hour-long lunch and learn, and so you'll see information for that coming up soon. Thank you to our sponsors whose support helps us put on these series and sessions. And so we are very excited to have the support of Associated Bank, Chase, Greater Milwaukee Foundation, and US Bank of UWIDA, and the work that we do specifically around this series and educating and bringing our members together to connect over big and new and ideas, and hopefully do some great collaborations. This is the kind of work we like to see. So next, I'm going to hand it over to Antonio Butts, Executive Director of the Walnut Way Conservation Corps.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you so much. Walnut Way Conservation Corp is a resident-led neighborhood organization on Milwaukee's near north side. You see a few bullets about the organization. What I'd like to share is that collaborating with UWIDA on this particular emerging topic is important to Walnut Way for a variety of reasons. The vision and values of Walnut Way are born out of the history of the Black migration from the South to the North and the cooperative spirit, togetherness, and collective effort that created a path for so many African Americans to embark on that journey with hopes and dreams of being able to work toward a higher quality of life and better standard of living. And so in this webinar conversation between Ms. Emonia and Dr. Nembhard, it provides us with an opportunity to see a glimpse of our past, remind us who we are and how we made things work, and the power that each of us have individually to make individual decisions to act collectively on any given issue that strengthens our togetherness and sets the stage to create a more favorable and encouraging future for our children. What we want is to be more congruent and strategic in our efforts and all the things that we're lifting, and not undermine our own leadership in the Black community. There's a lot of time and effort being contributed by a variety of people at every level and diverse backgrounds who do the work regardless of how bad things may seem. And so about a year ago or 2 years ago, we started the Community Wealth Building Program on a simple premise. And that's just that everybody has gifts and talents to share. And so we drive our community engagement work through that premise, and we build clusters of interest around that idea as a way to help lift each other in the neighborhood and create a more cohesive neighborhood. Lastly, as I get ready to introduce Miss Emonia, who is very near and dear to me in the 2 years that I've been able to grow and develop a relationship with her, and it's very inspiring to be able to work with her. Miss Emonia Barnett is the neighborhood champion for the Community Wealth Building Program. Miss Emonia has a very inspiring story and a very unique perspective on what she has experienced as the strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities locally in Lindsay Heights, and what it will take to transform our beliefs, behaviors, and attitudes in a way that produces better conditions in the places we live and better outcomes for our children. And so, Miss Emonia, I just want to let you know I thank you and I appreciate all the time and effort that you've been putting in this work. And you really inspired me to continue this work as well. So I want to turn the floor over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. A little embarrassing, but thank you. Hi, good evening. My name is Emonia Barnett, and I am a resident, as Antonio said, of Lindsay Heights. Now, I came back to this area about 6 years ago to take care of my dad, who was a 40-plus year resident of Lindsay Heights. He loved this neighborhood. I did not feel as close to it as he did. However, after an invitation from an organizer in the community, I started walking and meeting my neighbors. What an eye-opening experience, and it was a wonderful experience. I like to tell people that I went from Saul to Paul in my transformation in learning about the community and in developing a true devotion for the community now. Tonight, and I'm real excited about this, we are inviting you to listen to a conversation between Professor Jessica and myself about as we learn about the impact of African-American cooperatives in days of our past, and how the same skills and knowledge can be used for our future economic growth. But before I begin, I would like very, very much for you to meet Professor Jessica Gordon-Nembhard, who will introduce herself.
Good evening, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Thanks, Emonia, for doing this with me. Thanks to the organizers. I do want to start by acknowledging the original stewards of the land where I am. I'm in New York City area right now. That would be the Lenape Nation, but you all hopefully know who your original stewards are. I also want to acknowledge Ms. Emonia and I realized we have a lot of similarities, and one is that I too moved back to my childhood home where my parents have lived for over 65 years to help my parents out. I moved about 10 years ago from Washington, D.C. back up to the New York metro area and got a job here so that I could help my parents out. My dad is now 99 years old and still going strong. So we have that similar trajectory. I am Professor of Community Justice and Social Economic Development in the Department of Africana Studies at John Jay College, which is part of City University of New York. My Ph.D. is in economics. I'm a political economist who studies community economic development, cooperative and solidarity economics, racial wealth inequality, African American history, and community-based approaches to justice. I'm the author of a book called Collective Courage, A History of African American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice. I'm co-founder of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives and have been active in the cooperative movement in the United States. So much so that I was initiated into the U.S. Co-op Hall of Fame in 2016. I'm the mother of 2 and a grandmother of 3 grandsons. And I'm the daughter of activist scholars. So I have servant leader footsteps that I think I'm following, or I'm trying to follow. I was brought up to believe that knowledge needs to be applied in order to make the world better, that it's an obligation of a scholar, not just to excel in the field, not just to conduct rigorous scholarship and create new knowledge, but also to share and apply knowledge and to help others to make possible change. And so I hope that that's what I'm doing. That was the purpose of the research I did on African American cooperatives. And I actually love talking to people about it because I think that it can help us figure out how to make the world better. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Just a little housekeeping note before we start in on the questions. As we're talking, I'm sure things are going to pop up and you're going to have questions about. Please, if you would, write your questions in the Q&A, and Jessica or Christy will let us know, and we will get back to you on those and make sure that your questions are answered. Okay, Professor. History. I love history. And Rusty had given me your book to read, and I was like, it had the word history in it, and it had me right away. But what really caught me off guard is that this is a lost history. And I kept saying, how come I don't know this? Well, why did we lose this history? And how do we pass this vital information, this vital history to younger generations who have been introduced to entrepreneurship rather than to cooperatives?
Great questions. That was sort of my question too. So when I first started studying community economic development and learned about community initiated economic development, community ownership, started learning about cooperative economics and co-ops, and I started asking questions. Well, where are the Blacks? Where are the Black co-ops? The co-op meetings I started to go to had very few African Americans. The co-ops we were learning about, the co-op history I was learning about, had nothing about African Americans. I'm a researcher. I'm not even an historian, as some historians like to point out, but I am a researcher. And so I decided to try to do an economic history to understand to find, first of all, to find Black co-ops, and then to understand them and maybe understand why we don't know about them. So what I found, as you said, is it's a hidden history. The stories are there. You have to be very deliberate to find them. And hopefully now we don't have to be so deliberate. But at the time, I guess about 20 years ago, when I first started asking the questions and looking, it wasn't obvious. The co-op community, the existing co-op community hadn't seen a need to think about people of color and co-ops. And the Black community thought that co-ops were things hippies did, right? Just food co-ops that hippies owned and had nothing to do with Black people. Even though since the late 1960s, we have had the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, which is in 6 states in the South, mostly agricultural cooperatives, some credit unions, and a few others. But people didn't even kind of put that together with their thinking about co-ops. And also a lot of people think, agricultural co-ops and don't think about urban co-ops. And so I was really trying to find that history. So what did I find in the nutshell about why we don't know it? I found that African Americans had to be very protective of that history. because so much of the experience throughout the 400, 500 years that we've been in North America have been to stop us from doing cooperative economics. And sabotage, I call it sabotage, and it ranges from very simple things like financial sabotage. Banks won't lend you money. People won't use the co-op. Trucks and railroads won't let co-op produce and products go on, use their trains and things. So kind of the simple sabotage, insurance companies won't insure, that kind of thing, to the whole other gamut of white supremacist terrorism, violence, lynching. So Black cooperators got lynched. Black co-ops got burned down by angry whites who didn't want them to succeed, who didn't want us to succeed with an alternate model. And so there's that whole history. And two things happened with that history. One, because it was so dangerous to be involved, we actually protected ourselves by not talking about it. We started doing things under the radar, in hiding. We didn't necessarily tell our children about it or use those words to tell our children about it. So often we used more coded language, or we talked about you know, the exchange or the store, but we didn't talk about it as a co-op. We didn't name things co-op because we didn't want to draw attention. We didn't want to be hurt. We didn't want to draw attention to it. So that also meant we kind of lost the language, the words, even though I think that we still, the ideas like the sense of solidarity and collectivism kind of lasted, but we didn't have the words anymore for co-ops. And then the other problem is we live in a capitalist society that believes that co-ops are kind of socialism and communism. And so especially by the 1950s with all the red baiting, we also found out that it was easier to talk about voting rights and be accepted than it was to talk about economic democracy and economic cooperation. So we didn't really publicize our activities. We tried to protect ourselves, and we didn't find a good way to talk to our children about it, even if we told some stories about people owning something or everybody having a credit union or something. We didn't use the words that would make them connect it to a co-op. So how do we remedy that? Just quickly, because I have more to say in some of the other questions, but we have to teach our young people, right? We have to start talking about it. We have to use all the different, connect all the languages so people know that when we say a collective, we also mean cooperative economics, that when we're talking about a credit union, we mean a co-op, that kind of thing. And we need to educate our young people very early on. I can go into a whole tirade like about kindergarten, how kindergarten is a place where we actually beat cooperation out of our children, right? We want them to cooperate when they play for the inessential stuff, but for learning and for behavior and paying attention, right? You're supposed to do that all separate in your own little space, not talk to anybody, not consult with anybody. And that's what you don't graduate from kindergarten if you don't learn how to be an individual, right? And so we have to change kindergarten. We have to remind children and teach them what they can do with that sense of solidarity and cooperation that they already have instead of beating it out of them.
Okay.
So I can end there unless I do have an example of a youth co-op. Do you want me to do that now, or I could weave it in somewhere?
I'd like to hear that now, yes.
Okay. So one youth co-op, I actually have several examples in the book, and I found some other examples later, but one I just wanted to bring up today, Food from the Hood in LA, started in the 90s and lasted about 15 to 20 years. It started out with, it was actually a school garden project in South Central LA in Crenshaw High School. And the students were learning how to grow produce. And they realized that they wanted to give the produce away to the homeless. They wanted to help rebuild their neighborhood. This was 1992, right after the Rodney King uprisings. And so their neighborhood had been destroyed. So they used food as one of the ways to help their neighborhood. They then learned about farmers markets and started to bring and sell some of their food at the farmers market. They realized there was a business model there. They could actually earn some money from selling produce, but they also learned about value added. And so they decided to make salad dressing. And that's what they actually, that's when the name Food from the Hood, they were trying to name their salad dressing. So they had 4 kinds of salad dressing made from herbs from their gardens. They called it Food from the Hood. They started selling it at the farmers markets. They also realized they needed a bigger audience. So this was the beginning of Amazon, and they actually sold their salad dressing on Amazon for about 10 years and made money that way. They operated as a student collective from the school grounds. They jointly decided that 50% of their earnings would go to college scholarships. And so over a 10-year period, they were able to offer almost $200,000 in college scholarships to any of their graduating members. And so the school, high school, actually started a college prep program because they had students that would be able to go to high school. So you can see all the different things that co-op enabled those young people to do.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You know, we use the word co-op a lot, and I've heard it a lot, and there might be different definitions for it, but can you give us a functioning definition of co-ops? And are co-ops a true profit-making endeavor?
Yes, sure. And I sometimes say too much. Someone was just telling me the other day, I need to learn how to be more concise. So do stop me or focus me if you want, but I do have some definitions of co-ops and cooperative economics, and then I have a bunch of stuff to say about profit making. So
okay.
If you feel free to slow me down or focus me better if you don't think I'm focused enough. Okay. So cooperative economics is a democratic form of business ownership based on shared ownership, membership, and shared decision making. So co-ops are companies that are owned by the people who either buy the products that are needed or use the services, and they're called member owners, or co-ops can be owned by the people who make the products and provide the services, so worker owners. So that notion of joint ownership being a member rather than an employee or rather than a customer. Okay. They're created to satisfy a need, right? So their first purpose is not just to make a profit for the owners, but to actually address problem solving, to address the if there's a problem of a quality good or service or affordable good or service or access to something, then that's where people often come together to pool their resources to get better access. So a food co-op, people come together to buy, to form a co-op to buy produce, fresh produce or organic food or vegetarian food, that kind of thing. A housing co-op, people come together because they need affordable housing and access to clean and safe housing. And so they come together and jointly own a building so that they each can have an apartment there. A credit union, people who don't have adequate access to capital, access to banking, financial services, come together, create a credit union. That's the idea. And then the final piece about it is this governance, the democratic governance, what we call one person, one vote instead of one share, one vote. That's also where the membership notion. So you come together, everybody's considered a member, you're sharing risk, you're sharing the profit, you're, no one can outvote, each other, everybody has the same weight in the voice that they're put, and decisions are supposed to be made democratically. There's a set of 7 international principles that are recognized in order to be a co-op, and I probably won't remember them all. I tried to write them down, I forgot, but it's about autonomy, return to use, this democratic principle of one person, one vote, giving back to community, education, continuous education so that you can govern things democratically, that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Profit making. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the profit making, yes.
So co-ops are profit making enterprises, but with a but. Profit making is not their mission. It's not their bottom line. It's not their first reason for living. Okay. But they are business enterprises, and so all business enterprises have to have a surplus. They have to have additional value in order to start off the next year, right? So in that sense, they're profit making. They have to have surplus, and actually co-ops call it surplus. They don't really call it profit. They have to have surplus in order to move forward. But why is their profit or surplus different from a regular business or a sole proprietor or a corporation? Well, the difference is that the co-op, the purpose of the surplus is to keep the business sustainable and to make sure that the members get what they form the co-op to do. So if it's the food, fresh food, right, you have to have a surplus so that you can then buy food for the next year. You need a little bit more money to cover your costs because you don't know when there's going to be a disaster or a problem, and so you need a cushion. And then the democratic part means that you make decisions about how to invest, how to reinvest, how to invest the money that you pool together, and how much everybody should get back. So you make decisions together about how much to pay in wages, whether to increase wages, how much to give back to membership. We have what's called a patronage dividend in co-ops, where members deserve, if you have a good year, members deserve a portion of the surplus back every year if you decide that. Or if you don't decide that, what do you do with the surplus? The one person, one vote means that nobody says just because I put in more money or own more shares or whatever that I get to say more than anybody else. So it guarantees that everybody has a voice in this and can decide what to do with the surplus. Now, there are co-ops that are nonprofit, so you can elect to be nonprofit according to US law. In fact, credit unions, US law, both federal and state credit unions are nonprofit entities. So you cannot have a credit union that's not nonprofit in the United States. In Canada, their credit unions are for-profit financial institutions, but US law, it's not for profit. So you can vote and incorporate it as a not-for-profit if that's what your organization wants to do. But a co-op is not, the essence of a co-op is not for profit. The essence is that profit is the minor of the purposes of the co-op. Did that explain it enough?
I think so, but can you tell me what the key features of an economic co-op are?
Yes. So the purpose being a purpose-driven, a values and purpose-driven enterprise. So trying to solve a problem or address access through a business. The democracy, so that one person, one vote, and everybody has a voice. What's called the return to use, which means that when you do give returns to members, it's based on how much they participate and use the co-op, not based on how much they invest in the co-op. So again, it's about need and use rather than investment. And the continuous education, right, would be another piece about co-ops, because you can't be a democratic organization, right, without knowing, without having and sharing information, right? You have to know, do open book practices for the finances. People have to be able to understand the money part because they have to vote and make decisions about the money. They have to understand how the business runs. So there's lots of information transfer, education, and training that have to happen. That's also a signature of a co-op. And then that joint ownership, right? Pooling resources so that you can leverage them to get you more. So buying in bulk, again, if we use the food co-op, which is one of the easier examples, right? You pool your money, you're buying in bulk, and that's how you get the cost down for the things you want. And so again, that sort of joint ownership, pooling resources, sharing risks, and sharing profits. I think those would be the main features of co-op business.
Okay. I want to get a little more into the democracy. James, I think it's Wabassi in your book stated that the fundamental principle of cooperation is the principle of democracy. Can this really happen in today's environment? I mean, really look at what's going on in the world right now with the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, the administration of the White House. I mean, all of it. Can that really happen? And if so, how?
I would say yes, and it does. It is. It's existing right now, and it must. And why do I say all that? Right? Well, first of all, economic democracy and solidarity, right, are really the oldest ways to do business and to do economics. We just happen to live in a world that, you know, for what, 300 or 400 years now has been subsumed by racial capitalism and Eurocentric ideas about individuality and that kind of thing. And so we've forgotten that the roots of economic activity were really about family sharing and family production, right? And doing things as a community and a group of people. And so economic democracy is not foreign to us. It's actually how we really operate, but again, it's been alienated from us.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And if you look even today, right, the 21st century, the United States is probably the country, whether developed or underdeveloped, or whether in the North or the global South, we have the least appreciation for cooperatives. But we actually have a large percentage of our business is done by cooperatives. I forget all the numbers, but a very large percentage of our agriculture is done through cooperatives. If you count credit unions in the banking system, a large number of our banking is done with cooperatives. So we do practice it. We don't necessarily practice as much of the full democracy that we could, because we don't even know sometimes that we're in a democratic business, right? Especially in credit unions, a lot of people don't even realize they're in a democratic business. But we do business, and most of the world has more larger percentage of their economic activity is through co-op ownership. And so we practice it, we do it every day. We do it informally every day with barter and other solidarity acts we do with one another and our neighbors, but we also do it in actual existing co-ops. And there's really a co-op in every single, there's no industry that doesn't have an example of a co-op, even in the United States. There's no form of business that couldn't be transferred to a co-op, be made into a co-op. The co-op, right, because of that, the way we work together, because of the structure of joint ownership and democratic participation, right, we can save money. Co-ops are found to often be more productive than other businesses. They eliminate sort of paying exorbitant salaries to middlemen and managers, right? They often practice wage solidarity, so everyone gets the same wage or the same wage range. That's a mouthful. We find that co-ops, right, that training and working together, right, that sense of two heads are better than one, right, you come out with a stronger product with better working conditions all through co-ops. So that's why I say we must, because the future really should be that way of doing business and doing economics together, right? And learning how to make decisions also helps us to address conflict, to move to conflict transformation. Learning how to make decisions together, learning how to operate democratically actually helps us to do everything in our own lives better.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have an example of a really democratic co-op. Do you want to hear that?
Yes, please.
Because I figure I keep talking in sort of generalities. I'm going to try to keep ground myself in some basics. So Lusty Ladies, which you might think is a weird organization for me to tout as a democratic organization, but it's a strip club, or it was. It actually, unfortunately, no longer exists because with gentrification, their neighborhood in San Francisco was gentrified, and their rent went so up high they couldn't stay in business. But they were a worker co-op for about 10 years. They started, they bought the company from their owner after they had a successful union campaign. They wanted to be unionized, and they actually won the union campaign, but the owner didn't want to own a dance strip club that was unionized, so he was going to sell. So they decided to buy it themselves. So the first democratic piece was the dancers joined with the bouncers and the janitors, and the three groups brought the company together. So bouncers, janitors, and dancers. They do a self-managed, what we call a self-managed cooperative, worker cooperative, which means that they, everybody, all the employees who are members of the co-op are on the board of directors and make all the decisions together or through committee. You know, they decide on committees that make which decisions, and they're all divided into committees. They also decided that they wanted to rotate the most stressful and the most lucrative of the jobs, meaning the management roles, because they didn't think any one person should get the higher salary all the time or should have to have all the stress of being a manager. So they actually rotated the managers between every 3 to 6 months. They would have 2 managers at a time, and every 3 to 6 months they would vote on who the next set of managers would be. So again, very, very, very democratic. It also makes sure that everybody does almost every job or understands the different jobs, right? They also had a process there. I don't know how much you know about a peep show. These are all dancing behind glass. There was no touching or anything, but you have a single window with some dancers in one window, and then you have a group window with 3 or 4 dancers in the window. The single window actually gets better tips. And in regular peep shows, only white women with svelte bodies get to be in the single window. Well, Lusty Ladies, again, gave everybody a chance to be in the single window per week so that everyone had a chance to get the bigger tip. So again, that kind of democratic governance, wage solidarity. They had a basic hourly wage that everybody got. People got more money if they had to work more hours, like the manager had to work more hours, that kind of thing. And then they also had a wellness and health program. They connected with the Berkeley Free Clinic for free massages and free health care for their members, that kind of thing. So that's an example of a democratic organization. And the model worked fine until the rent skyrocketed. And so that was the one thing that they couldn't control.
You know, I guess that's probably an industry that would never have crossed my mind, right, that was then into a co-op, you know, and something that worked.
But sorely needed to be a co-op, right? That kind of industry, sex work, actually, if you're going to have it, it needs to be a co-op.
Yeah, because they actually kept jobs going for a period of time.
Right.
You said a couple of things though, and that and earlier about the conflict, and it made me think about how democracy to me seems messy, you know, especially if I'm watching the political world. It gets really messy, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of trust. And how do you handle that? Can you speak to that? You know, how do we work out some of those trust issues and build and learn how to deal with conflict in this kind of democratic co-op way? What could that be?
Right. So one of the things I learned as I started to study co-ops, especially studying worker co-ops, is that that's another one of those things. Well, everybody assumes democracy is messy, too messy to be connected with business, right? And takes too long, right? That a business has to make snap decisions, and you can't make snap decisions with a democracy. But what I learned, especially from the very successful worker co-ops, is that you have to teach people how to be democratic, especially in this world where most of, you know, what we call democratic is voting every 4 years or maybe every 2 years or something, right? But we don't talk about and we don't practice real democracy, making decisions together outside of the family or whatever, right? And in fact, the place that we spend the most of our waking hours is at work, right? And for most of us, our work is the most exploitative, hierarchical, and undemocratic place and thing that we do in our lives, right? So most of the time we're spending in non-democratic ways, and then we're supposed to be able to work democratically when we're not at work, right? So that makes no sense. But what if we turned that on its head? What if our work was the most democratic place we were? We were actually taught how to make decisions together, how to resolve conflict, or how to even actually, we're using the word now of transforming conflicts, not even just resolving, but how do you get to the bottom of things and make conflict be a way to have a dialogue to get to a better strategy and a better place and bring everybody along so everybody understands why you're making this decision or why this decision might be a good one, that kind of thing. But also co-ops, the strongest co-ops I've seen, so they train, they have good orientation and training about these things, how to come together, how to do conflict transformation, how to address dissent, how to come to decisions together, how to make everybody feel connected and feel comfortable with decisions. Because also deciding things about money is very, very hard. That's also one of the hardest things, right? So you put things in place before the actual monetary decision has to be made. That's where the training, right? So you're not a full member until you've gone through all these trainings about how to talk to people, how to share, how to come to decisions comfortably, that kind of thing. And then you've graduated to being in a decision-making place where you are making decisions about the money, that kind of thing. So there's a lot, that's why the continuous education and the training are so important. Putting in place, right, the procedures that will help you get to a side about everything. That's the other thing that people misconceive when you talk about democracy. It's not that everybody makes a decision about everything. It's that everybody makes a decision about what decisions everybody will make, right? So that's where this self-managed by committee structure, which is one of the ways to do it, you actually designate committees to make certain decisions. Like in a food co-op, you would have committees that have to do with each of the food departments, right? The produce, the canned food, this and that. And then you would also have an HR committee, and you might have some other committee, and then you might have a steering committee made up of reps from each of those committees. But the steering committee does not decide how much and which cheese to buy. The dairy committee decides that, right? So it's not like you have to always go back to the whole group or to the big group or whatever, right? You work out very carefully who makes what decisions, when and why. But, you know, if the dairy department wants to spend $5,000 on a new dairy case, maybe they can't make that decision by themselves. But they certainly can decide what cheese to order each week and how much, right? So being very deliberate about that kind of stuff means you can still make fast decisions within your small committee, but everybody understands who's making which decisions, when, under, and why, that kind of thing. And the last thing I think I want to say about the messiness of democracy is, oh, sorry, two more things. I've also seen co-ops that have very deliberately done trust building and bonding exercises. I know one co-op which was dealing with a lot of money. Actually, you had to go through a bonding weekend, and they used a whole bunch of African spirituality and African values to do it because it was a Black housing co-op in Atlanta. And they said, yeah, you can't even be a member. You can't put in your first payment in the co-op if you don't go through this bonding exercise. And so you learn, everybody agreed to how to operate together. They went through this training together and learned how to trust and work together and feel comfortable with that. If you couldn't get through that weekend and didn't feel comfortable at the end, then maybe you didn't join the co-op, or maybe you went through the second version of the bonding. But anyway, but they recognized how important it was to be deliberate about building trust and bonding, so that then you could go and start making decisions together and trust each other with those decisions. And then the last thing I just want to say is, you know, in the end, it's really kind of magical how it works. I mean, once you're deliberate about putting in the skills and structure so that it can work, it's really magical, right? We become more human. We become better people. We learn how to be humble leaders and servant leaders. I can give you examples of co-ops with imprisoned people, with incarcerated members, and that's what they talk about, that the co-op experience, being in a co-op while in prison, really just gave them a whole new sense of life, a whole new sense of their own human dignity, a whole new sense of what solidarity and camaraderie mean, and all while being able to make a living for themselves and to pay, you know, to help support their families, even though they were still in jail and prison. So, you know, that's another kind of, that transformativeness, that magic that happens is really important, because we put in place the things to make democracy work properly.
That sounds like a plus to me to being a cooperative, that magic that you're talking about. So can you tell us some more pluses to becoming a cooperative, and then give us the flip side of that coin, the negative side of it too?
Right. So the important components for success first would be, you know, having the adequate resources, having the right financing, having the right training and management training about how to do this democracy as well as how to do the business. So you're always, for a co-op, there's really these at least two parallel tracks, right? It's still a business, so you have to have the business management, the business plan, et cetera. And then there's the what we call the mutuality or the association track. You've got to have the personal relationships and the connection. So everything kind of goes in parallel. So you need resources both for the mutuality part and for the business part, and finances for that, et cetera. Human energy and enthusiasm. We underestimate how important that is. But for people to put in their own energy, you know, sometimes we say sweat equity, but sweat equity is more than, is different from energy, because that's the labor. And often there is sweat equity that people put into a co-op. But there's also the human energy. That's our attitude, time, and I don't know another word for energy, that we put, you know, that we put in because we're interested. We want this to work. We want to be a part. Our enthusiasm, that kind of thing. The solidarity and trust are another element. It's required, but it also gets built and developed through this model. The education, right? I keep talking about how important continuous education and learning together. One of the surprising findings in my book, once I started putting it all together, was that almost every Black co-op that I learned about started with a study circle, people coming together to study what was happening in their community, what could they do about it, and then studying cooperative economics together. So that learning together is also a bonding, is a way to bond, and really essential. Again, it's an input and an output, right? So you need to have that for the co-op to work, but it's also something that comes out of being in a co-op and connected to a co-op. Good communication with your community and your customers, right? They need to know what you're doing, why you're a co-op, why you operate the way you do, what your purpose is, why you're there, because community support, both as customers, but also just community support in general, matters a huge amount to how well the co-op does and how it can prosper, especially co-ops are very localized, local businesses. The intercooperation, so not just community support and community knowledge, but cooperating with other businesses in your community, especially if there's other co-ops, but even if they're not other co-ops, other local businesses. Doing that intercooperation. I also found in my research, and I assume it's with every ethnic group and racial group, but reaching and incorporating youth. Again, it was a finding I hadn't expected, but a lot of the co-ops were very deliberate about incorporating youth, whether they had a youth version of the same co-op or tried to include youth or promoted the co-ops as a way for youth to be involved in the future, that kind of thing, or using the co-ops to help young people fashion their own future and help their communities. And leadership roles for women. It definitely seems like the Black co-ops used and encouraged Black women's leadership or developed Black women's leadership more than even any other co-ops I've heard about. But the leadership roles of Black women, I think, are also, again, an important component of what made the co-op successful, but also an output from the co-ops. And then the last piece about the pluses of a co-op, both what sort of you need in it and what can come out of it, is this, or maybe I said it already, anchoring in a community and recirculating resources in a community. So because co-ops are so local, they attract, right, local resources, but they also create community wealth. So they don't just create income and wealth for their members, but they create a kind of ecosystem around them because of all those other things I just said, how they work with other groups, with other businesses. They really, what we call recirculate, like multiply a dollar spent at a co-op, recirculates in a community much longer than a dollar spent at Walmart or at a chain company or that kind of thing. So that recirculation would be another one.
Okay.
And then barriers, did you ask me?
Yes, the negatives.
So the negatives are some of the same, actually, and then some difference. So access to capital and capitalization can be a real problem. It's a problem for any small business, but it's definitely a problem for co-ops. You have to have some kind of plan for capitalization, even if you have to start very small and slowly build up once you get more access to capital. You know, the great thing about co-ops is how, as I said, you can pool meager resources and make that bulk buying and stuff work for you. But in the end, it's very hard for a co-op to have no access to capital. So, even if you use pooled resources. Though I've seen a lot of unique ways to do it. A lot of co-ops have been able to get neighbors and family members to give them loans and things like that to carry them over until they can get other access to capital, that kind of thing. If you don't do that proper orientation and training, right, if you skimp on that orientation and training, I can pretty much guarantee you that your co-op won't last. So making sure to have that proper orientation and training before people become full members or while people are becoming full members is really important. And they need co-op economic training, they need co-op management education, and they also need training on the industry, whatever the industry the co-op is in. They need the business training as well. Because remember, now everybody's making business decisions. Everybody's an owner, and I think we're going to talk about that in a minute. The distrust and excessive competition within a co-op and with people from outside the co-op trying to destroy the co-op. Those are huge problems. That's again why the trust building is so important, as well as the making connections with your community and having your community know and support you is very important. Ideology, right? Not really believing that the democratic part of a co-op is a good thing, right? A lot of people, sometimes this happens in housing co-ops, but it can happen in other co-ops too, where you just want to be involved because you want the access to affordable housing or the access that a co-op gives you, but you don't really believe in all the principles and values of a co-op. So you kind of, you're very superficial, you're in it just for what you can get out of it. You're not really convinced of the model. Well, that can just destroy a co-op. It's hard to figure out how you weed those people out. My daughter actually was the founder and president of a housing co-op when she was in college. And one of the hardest things she said she had to do was get the co-op in its second year to pass a policy for how you dissolve people's membership, because they had so many freeloaders. They had people who just wanted the affordable housing. They didn't want to follow any of the house rules. They didn't want to come to any meetings. They didn't, right? They weren't cleaning up. They're doing their chores. And so, but it was really hard to get rid of them. They didn't have a policy for like what constitutes you not being renewed as a member for the next year, or what constitutes you being asked in the middle of the year to leave. And then, everybody was being liberal about it. They felt it was mean to get people out, right? But then the co-op couldn't function because they didn't have enough people. They wouldn't have a quorum at a meeting. They couldn't make decisions. Some of the houses weren't clean because half the people weren't doing their part, right? So it took her 1.5 years with a committee. They finally drew up what they thought were fair policies, like not making someone leave in the middle of the semester so they would not have some place to stay to finish their semester, right? And then having certain rules about how many meetings and this and that. And so finally they got the policy done. Then it took them another 6 months to get everyone to agree to sign, to vote on the policy. But finally, by the time they got it all done, people realized that they were right. They were being unrealistic, and they were helping to destroy the co-op by not adopting a fair process that everybody knew ahead of time for how to handle that, and not making sure that when they oriented people understood this is what they were coming into, a family and a group of people, right? They weren't just getting affordable housing, that kind of thing. So that's where ideology can get in the way. And then political ideology, right? Politics and not having the right policies, right? There's some states that don't have expansive co-op policies. We don't actually have federal co-op policies. So sometimes you can be in a state and you can't even incorporate a worker co-op in that state. So that is a barrier. Some states only have agriculture and credit union laws. And so if you want to incorporate as a different kind of co-op, you have to go out of state and then get a license to operate in the state that you want to be in. So there's some bureaucratic issues that can stop, especially if we want to do a large scale co-op development. If your state doesn't have good co-op laws, then that's hard to do. If the policies, again, are still kind of seeing co-ops as as communist or whatever, and so you don't have elected officials who are supportive or who even understand the model, that's a problem. So we have a lot of groups that are actually educating their public officials about the model so they can get more buy-in. And then the racism, patriarchy, class divisions, all those isms definitely can destroy a co-op. So figuring out how to have those conversations, how to do anti-oppression training, how to really talk through people's implicit biases and have a format, right, for how to talk about these things and how to reduce, right, microaggressions, that kind of thing is really important because otherwise, again, you don't have the trust and you can't operate that well. And then again, from my history for African Americans, there was that, you know, the racism and the sabotage. And so those things are, you know, they got in the way. In fact, a lot of the co-ops that so-called failed in history, they didn't fail for any of those other reasons I just said, even though they could have, because those are, you know, very normal reasons, but most often they fail because of the white supremacist violence against them.
Yeah, I see we're kind of running low. Starting at 7:02, and I got 4 more questions, but I think I'm gonna skip around a little bit on these a little bit, and because I was wondering about, you know, because I read the book and I saw all that the deliberate getting rid of the co-ops and stuff, and you know, I don't know if things have changed that much even in today's environment. So I guess what I would like to know is, you know, they started, they existed, some lasted a long time, some didn't. But how do co-ops today avoid the same hazards from the past? And is this a reason for us to become politically involved? Because I also noticed that a lot of the co-ops started and then they realized they needed to get politically involved so they could change some laws and institute some stronger rules. So do we need to do that?
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head. A lot of times the co-op started just for survival, right? Just people needed something, they needed food, they needed a house, they needed this and that, and they came together for survival. But then they realized that the co-op model was one they might want for longevity, but then there were these barriers. And so they had to figure out, right, how to protect themselves, what to do. And so there's multiple prongs, we have to fight 2 or 3 fights at once, right? So we have to do all those things internal to the co-op that will keep us strong, right? As I said, get the democracy right, you know, get the business model right, that kind of stuff. But we also had to figure out what are our supports? And the 2 things that I found in the history was the community support. Some communities actually put themselves in the line, right, between the white posse terrorists and the co-op, right, and said, no, you're not going to do this to that co-op. So you know, or took up arms to protect the co-op. So there's that level of, but only if the community understands and knows and wants the co-op there will they act like that, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that level. But then there's also, as you said, this politics level. A lot of for the Black history, the first stepping stone to politics is Black organizations. So I also noticed that when there were strong Black organizations, who were deliberately talking about co-ops, doing co-op development, doing co-op education, and then trying to get policies changed, we had more Black co-ops. So definitely that, you know, that join together into local and regional and national groups that will both give us some of the education and support we need, help us raise money, but also that will speak for us nationally, statewide, nationally, right? That will try to get more public support, more legal support, that kind of thing was very important. And then co-op members, now that they learn sort of how to work together, how to make decisions together, how to be leaders, they often went on to be leaders. They would run for office, local, state, and federal office. They would start organizing other nonprofits and community organizations in their neighborhoods. So we also ended up with people very well, right, capacity building gets raised. And so that capacity building can be used for policy analysis, for other political activity. Even we have examples of women who then became more active in their PTAs, so advocating for their children, that kind of thing. So there's lots of different levels of the capacity development that then made sure that either the co-ops themselves were stronger or the co-op movement remained strong, that kind of thing. So even though it looks like it's really hard, right, there's all these barriers, again, it's the magic of it is that people, once they start using the model or see the importance of the model, there's so much things that could happen. So many spillovers and so many positive things that can come out. The other thing you didn't really ask, but I guess I'll say it right here, is I tried not to use the word failure in my book. One, because so many of the co-ops that didn't last, it was because of sabotage. But also, I didn't use the word failure because so much, even when a co-op doesn't last, so much else gets developed. The community solidarity, the training, the skills, the leadership development, and people go on and do more and other things and sometimes better things. Sometimes the co-op did solve the initial problem it started for, and that's why it didn't last anymore, because the problem was sort of solved. And so there's lots of ways you can think about why and how it's worth it to go through such a process, even if the initial idea for the co-op isn't what you end up with. It's really about a process of, right, doing economics in a humane, value-driven way that really supports human development and well-being.
Okay. Okay. I see we're about at 7:10, so I think we're going to flip the switch and let you ask me a couple of questions, and because we want to leave a little time for to answer the questions that are showing up in the Q&A. Okay.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I guess we were too ambitious. I warned you though. I was going to give long answers. I'm sorry.
Oh no, don't apologize. I love them. Please.
So my first question for you is, so what is happening in Lindsay Heights in terms of community activism and grassroots economic organizing? What can you tell me and the rest of the group?
Well, there's a lot happening in Lindsay Heights, and I just kind of bullet pointed it so that I can make sure I hit some of the highlights. They started out as doing something with the empty lots that we have throughout the community. So like right next to Walnut Way, there is a peach orchard and a pear orchard in the back, and they've got corn growing and cherries. Plus they do landscaping. There is a company, a program called Blue Skies, and Blue Skies does landscaping, but their projects are also for community advocacy work, and it's centered around the application of doing things more ecological practices rather than those conventional practices. And this is a preference for them, and it's a key component in a partnership with the Institute of Sustainable Communities. So you've got Blue Skies, and really, it's really beautiful around the area. Then we have the Wellness Commons, and it's also working on innovations of wellness. And it's a collaborative cohort of businesses, wellness businesses, neighborhood groups, the academic institutions, providing programs and services that reflect the social and economic needs of the community through an integrated approach. We have our community wealth program, which is community wealth building, which is what I work closely with. And, you know, I looked at the fact that we had all this historic disinvestment. There's this revitalization going on downtown. We weren't sure we were reaping any benefits for it. And so community wealth building came up, and it looks at residents' assets rather than needs. What do we already have? And build upon that. Also, there is the NID, the Neighborhood Improvement District, which is a federal program or government program, maybe not federal, a government program that really try to give power to the residents, and the residents look and say, you know, what do we need in our community? Do we need more mental health? Do we need to help the elderly with their homes so they can stay in their homes and the neighborhoods would not be gentrified? That type of thing. What am I forgetting? I don't know. I don't know what I'm forgetting. Oh, and I think there's civic and community engagement too. And I think Walnut Way, as Antonio said at the beginning, really wants to empower the residents, you know, and that sounds a little bit more to what we were talking about being more cooperative and working together.
Right, so that's my next question. And why is Walnut Way interested in cooperative economics? What do you think that's gonna bring?
Well, I think the reason we're interested is because it has been disenfranchised. We're in 53206, which I am told is one of the worst zip codes in the country. But when you live here, it doesn't seem to be the worst. You know what I'm saying? So it's and so it's trying to change that impression of what this neighborhood is. I'm not saying we're perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There are things that do need to change, but if we do it more cooperatively, working together, collaborating, finding new ways to handle some of the disenfranchisement that's going on in the neighborhood, the drugs, the prostitution, all that kind of good stuff. You know, maybe even try, because when you talked about the strip club, I mean, my head went, wow, how can we use that with the drug dealers? How can we use that? You know, and maybe not have it be selling illegal, but selling legally. You know, there's CBD, hemp. I just think the community is ready for it, but missing the one important point that you keep talking to us about is the education and the learning and the knowing, because what do they say? When you know better, you do better. So I think that's what Walnut Way is what we're interested in trying to do with cooperative economics. Not to make Walnut Way the be all, but make the neighborhood the be all.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. No, I think that's great. And the point is to have options and to know what all the options are, because so often we're boxed in because we don't feel like we have options, or we don't think the thing we might want to try to do will work or anything. I mean, that was another piece I was trying to do, is show that these are viable, right? These are things we have done, are viable. People still operate this way, and we can do it. So I always like to, you know, when I talk to communities, so what are the next steps now that you've heard me talk about this stuff, now that, you know, the history isn't so hidden? What can you do? What are you guys going to do next?
You know what? I think we're going to keep pushing ahead, pushing forward. You know, there are some really good things coming that I have really enjoyed seeing. We work with other organizations like Running Rebels, New Life, UETA, GMF, Greater Milwaukee Foundation. I know there's a bunch of others I'm forgetting, and we're still working together and trying to encourage people. Churches, even with the churches in the area, we're talking to churches, and the businesses in the area. So it's saying this is who we are. Guys, how can we make this a better place for all of us to live? You're doing business here. How can we continue to do that? So Rusty always says it's an experiment. So we're going to keep working the experiment, pushing ahead with the experiment, and not getting discouraged with the disappointments or the negatives that come, because like you said, that is going to happen, and we can learn from that and do it better the next time. So
Right.
It's an exciting time, I think, for Lindsay Heights right now with all that's going on. The other group I thought I left out was the universities. That's another group that's working with us. And there's a co-op on the South Side that is working with internet, because it's kind of a desert here with internet. And so we're working with them. So sometimes I think we have too many irons in the fire, but that I think we're just going to keep pushing ahead, and we're not going to slow down this train if we don't have to.
That sounds great. So I guess we need to get to some questions. We're never going to answer all these questions, but.
Yes, we have a lot, but first, just thank you so very much to Miss Emonia and Dr. Jessica for providing such an amazing conversation for us to learn from. I'm about to hire Miss Emonia to facilitate every single meeting and webinar I ever host, I think.
Smart idea. She's fabulous.
I agree. So we do have lots of questions to get to. Chris and I have sort of been tracking them. I will note that there were a lot about very specific to forming cooperatives. So just to let you guys know, we're going to be thinking about that for the future, and Christy will address some of that in our closing. So we went with some of the questions that are a little bit more historical, or a little bit more related to some of the things that maybe we didn't quite get to. So there was a really great question around industries, and if you came across any industries, or if you're aware of any industries with already high African American ownership or engagement that you think would be good for becoming co-ops.
Oh, shoot. At first, I thought you wanted to know the areas that had the most Black co-ops, and I was going to say, I think housing co-ops and credit unions, but that's not what the question was. Sorry. It's about industries that already have high concentration of Blacks that could be converted to co-ops.
Yeah.
Yeah, so actually there is, the worker co-op movement is trying to work with Black chambers of commerce with succession planning. So rather than an actual industry, I would say Black-owned businesses that have an aging owner, especially who don't have children, or don't have children who want to take over the business, those are very ripe, and conversions are actually a really interesting way to do co-op, especially worker co-op development, because there are actual federal supports both for the owner to sell and for the worker owner, the employees to buy. There's tax credits and things like that. So just converting an existing business, especially one that the owner doesn't know what to do when they're going to retire, is a great place. If you think about all the different sort of service areas that Black people tend to be concentrated in, right? Health and beauty, nursing, things like that. I mean, there's examples of nurses cooperatives and health clinic cooperatives and health insurance cooperatives. I haven't seen as many sort of beauty parlor or barber cooperatives, but you could see how those could work, especially if you think about shared space, so that you could still be sort of an independent owner, but you own the space together. So there's there's a woman's collective with women entrepreneurs in, what do? They do catering, jewelry, and I think hair products. So what they did was they created a collective that was able to buy a building, and they all have a stall in the building. So they have a safe and permanent space to sell instead of doing pop-ups and stuff. So each of them still own their own independent business, but they own the space together. So you can think about that kind of thing. Sometimes that's easier, especially if you have people who are already sort of doing their own business. You don't have to totally convince them to go to a co-op, that kind of thing. So I know we don't have that much time, so I guess that's good enough to start, right? But
Yeah.
you can see how you can convert almost anything. Childcare can be co-ops, either parent-owned or worker-owned or both. You know, to me, anything converts pretty well.
Sure, if the opportunity is presented. We had a lot of questions about funding and starting co-ops. So particularly, someone was wondering, with the lack of African-American inherited wealth, how do co-ops tend to meet their financial needs to get started? Like, are there foundations or CDFIs like that you've been aware of across the country in researching this that provide some of that, like maybe seed funding, or how are they able to do that?
Right, so there's two things. One, the great thing about a co-op is you can often fulfill your equity investment either in installments or start in small amounts. So you don't always need a whole lot of money, but then that means you do need money from somewhere else, right? If it's a capital intensive business. But the idea is, especially worker co-ops, often you just need to put in the first 50 or $100 and the rest comes out of your wages while you're becoming a member. So you don't need the upfront money to be in a worker co-op, but the worker co-op obviously needs some funding. So there are some really interesting, a group called Seed Commons, which is an outgrowth of the Working World Foundation, does what we call non-extractive lending, and Seed Commons is now a co-op of about 20 or 30 local loan funds all around the country that do non-extractive lending, meaning very low interest or administrative fees, long-term loans, and then if you don't succeed, you actually don't owe the money back. Only if you succeed do you owe the money back. There's also a co-op called Shared Capital, which does lending to co-ops on very fair. Co-op Fund of New England does the same thing. There's some smaller funds, some industries like the bakery industry in Oakland, California started a fund to reproduce co-op worker-owned bakeries. There's a group in Western Massachusetts, Valley Alliance, who have all of their worker co-op members put in money so that they can do loans to groups to convert to a worker co-op or to start up. And then there is the National Cooperative Bank. It's a little bit harder to get money. You have to be kind of a bigger project, not such a small project, but to get money from them. But they also have loan funds, and there's some co-op foundations that also give grants to do co-op development in certain communities or for certain industries. So there's actually more and more over the years that I've started studying this. I would say in the last 5 years, there's been a lot more options for how to do co-ops in low-income communities with reasonable loans from organizations that want to be supportive of low-income co-op development.
Sure, that's helpful to know, I think, especially as people are just reading through the comments and the other questions. Folks are already very interested in figuring out how to move maybe things they're already looking at or forming, or and that seems to be something that they thought was a barrier, but it seems like that's actually probably not as difficult as they think it might be, at least initially.
Yeah, let me just say one other thing, which I think was one of the questions Ms. Emonia was going to ask me. The startup, you know, in some ways, startup is scary and a huge thing. But as I said, most of the co-ops that I studied just started with people coming together in somebody's living room or in a classroom in the high school and talking together, right? And then, you know, one of the groups in the middle of the 30s in the Great Depression in Gary, Indiana, that's what they did. And then within a year and a half, they had the largest Black grocery store in the country, you know, in the mid 30s, right? So, so really, the really main thing is to come together, have people who want to come together and want to solve problems together. And then you just keep working, you know, it took them 18 months before they opened the store, but within another year, the store was fabulously successful. So the 18 months was good, hard work that was worth it to put in the front end, right? So really the first thing to do is get a group of people who want to solve a problem and figure out how to solve it together, and then slowly put the pieces together. And then you can, you know, there's lots of resources you can be connected to for all the different things that you need, for the education you need, the financing, etc.
Definitely. That's a good segue, I think, into the last question that we have time for. Folks are really interested in specific examples of cooperatives. So are there a handful that stand out to you during your studies and research that inspired you the most?
So yes. And sometimes I think I talk about them too much, but anyway, the Gary, Indiana one, Consumer Cooperative Trading Company in the 30s. I think I pretty much said all I need to say about them. There's a lot more to the story, but that was a really interesting. They ended up with a grocery store, a gas station, a credit union, and a second grocery branch, all within 5 years during the Great Depression. So that one's really inspiring, and especially because it started with some high school teachers and some neighbors, and they also put in 2 courses in the high school, the night school, the adult education part. So they had a whole education component. They had a strong Black Women's Guild, etc. Freedom Quilting Bee, another one of my favorites, 1960s, also actually lasted over 20 years and sort of still in existence. So that's what, 40 years or something. Anyway, they're sharecropping women who realized that they could sell quilts and make extra money to augment, you know, since sharecropping is actually debt peonage. They came together, made quilts together, sold them, made enough money to buy 23 acres of land, so built a sewing factory so they could make bigger quilts and not have to work from home. Because they now weren't working from home and had their own land and factory, they needed something to do with their children, so they started a daycare program, an after-school program, a summer reading program. Within, let's say 67, 80, within 15 years, they were the largest employer in their town. This is a small town in Alabama. Some of them got well known with the Gee's Bend quilts that got noticed by the Smithsonian. And also owning land gave them more leverage with the white supremacists in their town, so that when they and some of their neighbors were getting retaliated against for registering to vote and being involved in the civil rights movement, they now owned their own land and helped other sharecroppers move off the land, sold some of their land to other former sharecroppers, rented some of their land to former sharecroppers to get them out of a sharecropping debt situation. And so the co-op, you know, did so much stuff for the women, for the town, for the land ownership issue, etc. So that's another one I really like. And there's a bunch of urban co-ops, I guess. Cooperative Home Care Associates in the South Bronx, another one that's long lasting from 87 to now. It's actually the largest worker co-op in the United States, with over 1,300 worker owners, mostly Latinx, Latino women, and African women, African American women. You know, well, actually, all these examples were for-profit, but they're a for-profit home care association, which prides itself in high-quality home care. They train nurses as well as home care providers. They have a separate training arm, so they do their own unique high-quality training for all the positions they fill. So they connected that. They also have a disabilities home care specialization. They help their women to become banked, to have savings, and they give them retirement funds as well as full health insurance and vacation time, as well as stable jobs with job ladder opportunities. So that's another really exciting model. I think we're running out of time.
Yeah.
There's a bunch more like that.
Yeah, those are really unique examples too. So it really goes to show that cooperatives really do, as you said before, kind of fit in every industry that there might be. And just so folks know, I did drop the link to Dr. Jessica's book in the chat, where she goes into a little bit more on some of the co-ops that she talked about today. So I'll turn it over to Christy now to close us out, and Antonio.
So before we close out, we're going to go a few minutes over, but we do want to note there's some really good questions that were, like Jessica said, pretty specific, that I think what we'll do is compile these and maybe see if we can get some answered and we can share them out. Sometime back to history. And so, I mean, I know your book covers a lot of that too. It's really fascinating. Emonia and Rusty both said it was an awesome read. We have downloaded it too and purchased it. I can't wait to read it. But I think, you know, one of the reasons why we wanted to focus on that was because we felt like it really provides this missing bridge, if you will, for people who think like this seems really hard, or how do you even get this started? And to know that people have been doing this for a long, long time. And, you know, a lot of people have questions about successful examples and how do we do this? And I think just your conversation reiterated over and over again that really it's a matter of people coming together and working together. Cooperation, cooperative, but how important that really is. So it might be just a matter of a study circle. And that's how you start. You start with an idea. And so folks, please know that, you know, there's other questions that will sort of get answered and share that back out. I know we couldn't get them all today. There were some really good ones. And then I will just say, please know that one of the conversations that Walnut Way and UWITA is going to be having is sort of what does a follow-up session look like? And we want to have talked to Dr. Jessica too about that, because we think that we could do a more in-depth session with people who are really interested. And so we'll just send out a survey after this. Please answer if you are interested in being part of a study circle or trying to move something forward or learning with other people. We would love to know that, because we can help kind of support getting that started, and we are committed to that. And so now I'm going to hand it off to Antonio.
Thanks, Christy. I'll be really quick. I'd just like to say the big takeaways from this conversation for me that I'll be taking back and sharing with the team is those essential building blocks, that part where we know that people have gifts and talents, but how do we help them develop the management skills around that expertise? How do we continue to help people develop the core job skills? But even most importantly, the biggest one is that we're only as strong as our organizations and institutions in the neighborhood. So we have to strengthen our governance skills too. I'd like to say thank you so much, Miss Emonia. Thank you so, so much. Thank you as well, Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nembhard. And thank you to the UWITA team. Very, very grateful to be in collaboration with you all, Christy, and driving this. We know this is a big deal. And so a big value for us is learning through implementation. And so we're going to actively be engaged in this work. And so we'll all be seeing great things come out of this conversation in the future.
Yes, and before we go, I do want to note too, some people had asked about resources. So when we send out the Q&A follow-up, we'll be sure to include some links. And there were some questions related to housing co-ops. You know, for those of you, Wayman Winston has been working with the Milwaukee Mutual Housing Network here. So that is definitely an effort that's been underway for the last year. And so we'll make sure to put those things. So for folks that really want to connect to some of these things that are happening on the ground, we'll make sure that we include some things for you to do that too. So please feel free to reach out to Jessica Wetzel or myself or Antonio, Emonia, Rusty, if you know, however you got here. And let us know if there's anything else that we can help you with as we move forward, but answer the survey. And I guess I want to thank our presenters. You guys were wonderful and amazing. It was a dynamic conversation. And I don't know if you guys want to say anything else to close us out.
Just thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'd be happy to come back if you think it will be helpful.
Okay, yes.
And I just want to say thank you. And I really enjoy meeting and being able to interview Professor Jessica. I really do. You're wonderful.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. We appreciate you sharing your evening with us. And we are looking forward to supporting the good work that hopefully will come out of this. So thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.
Be safe, everyone.